All right, what's up, y'all? Let's talk about banks and why we have them and how banks create money. I don't want to say out of nothing, but seemingly out of nothing, which will be kind of the core of where we're going with this. I'll try to be brief because I know your attention span isn't too long. Hopefully, by the end of this all, we'll have a better understanding of what the role of private banks are and how they relate to the Federal Reserve. So, the starting block for banks is going to be that when we put money into a bank, the bank lends out most of it, and they're required to keep a small amount of it. Here I talk about the rental car being a good example of that. Obviously, let's take an airport like Philadelphia International Airport. They don't have enough rental cars on deck for every person that goes to the airport, but that's because they don't necessarily need one for each person, right? They need enough rental cars to satisfy a proportion of people who are looking to rent. Banks do the same thing, but with your money, right? If all of us have our money at the First Bank of Southern Regional, all of that money doesn't just sit there in a vault, right? Only a small portion of it is kept liquid on hand in case a few of us come in wanting money. So we call that bank reserves. It's the percentage of deposits that are kept actually on hand at the bank. This is kind of like bank heist stuff, where like you got money in a big vault in the bank, where you go and like rob it with your friends and ski masks and stuff like that. In America, we usually keep that to about 10%. Now, mind you, it says vault cash, but also it's a direct wire transfer from the Federal Reserve. So it's not always just kept in cash, but there is about 10% of cash kept on hand. That is known as the reserve ratio. It is the fraction of deposits that are required to be kept on hand. So let's say at that First Bank of Southern Regional, we have $100,000 in it. And the reserve ratio says we have a 10% requirement. Well, then 10% of that must be available on any given day to lend out. The other 90%, the bank has an opportunity to loan out. So, more to come on that. Now, before we get into the money multiplier, let's talk about bank runs real quick since this is relevant to what we just watched last week in The Big Short. If banks don't have enough cash on hand, if all of us went to pull our cash out immediately from the Bank of Southern Regional, they wouldn't have enough to liquidate it, and then the banks would fail. Over here, we'll see three famous bank runs that took place during the Great Recession, or The Big Short, like we just watched. We'll see how much these banks depleted their wealth in just a matter of days. And these things are honestly a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? When people see it, kind of like the toilet paper hoarding going on right now with COVID, once some people see it, other people do it, it kind of instills more panic, and then it becomes an issue, even though it probably shouldn't be. Wachovia, you see there on the bottom, they had their bank run happen one day after Washington Mutual did. Now, Wachovia ended up actually selling off and becoming Wells Fargo. Um, and if you Philadelphia sports fans, but like the Sixers and the Flyers, they used to play at the Wachovia Center. It's now the Wells Fargo Center. You can thank the Great Recession for that one. Of course, if a bank doesn't have enough cash to satisfy what people want, they have to liquidate, meaning that they have to sell off assets they hold. Banks own homes, banks own properties, banks own precious metals and corporate papers. So when stuff hits the fan, banks will sell those assets to get cash to meet the requirements. This point we already talked about. Bank runs are contagious. And then, of course, bank runs not only harm the banks, but they harm the economy. This chart, what it's talking about right here, is that it's showing that even though money can be pumped into the economy by the Fed, here we have it going on in the Great Depression, we see currency in circulation is increasing, so the Fed is pumping out money. But because checkable deposits are falling, meaning that because people are continuing to pull money out of banks, we actually see the M1 money supply shrink. So to give that to you in fewer words, The government can roll out as much paper money as they want to, but if people aren't going to put money into the banks to get lent back out into the economy is still going to shrink. Banks play a huge role in making sure that the economy perpetuates and continues to move forward through loaning out money. To make sure banks abide by the rules, these all came out of really the Great Depression to make sure we never have it again. So these things have been in existence for almost 100 years. FDIC insurance, if you have your money right now at Bank of America, let's say, and Bank of America goes out of business tomorrow, the FDIC insures your account up to $250,000. So if you have 10K sitting in that bank account and they go belly up tomorrow, the FDIC will cut you a check for 10K because you're insured. Now, when you all make it rich one day and you're multi-millionaires, this is why you want to have multiple bank accounts, because if you have more than $250,000 in any one given account and that company goes out of business, you're only insured up to that $250,000. So let's say you have $1 million in cold hard cash. You want to split that up between 4 different accounts to make sure that each one of them is fully insured. Capital requirements. This makes sure that banks own enough things to back up the money that they say they have. So if we have $100,000 worth of our accounts in the Bank of Southern Regional better own something worth $100,000, right? They're showing that they have the capital to back up the money. Reserve requirements, which we just talked about, they have to keep a certain portion or ratio of that money on deck and liquid. And then the discount window. When in doubt, the Federal Reserve can loan money to private banks to avoid having bank failures. So, how do banks create money? This was the warm-up, but unfortunately we can't do it. So just follow along here real quick. Let's say that you have $1,000 in cash. That means that the total money supply is $1,000. Now, you deposit it into a bank, and as we see here, there is $1,000 in checkable deposits available right here. Now, let's fast forward one more round. The bank is required to keep 10% of it. That's a reserve ratio. They'll lend out the other $900 then. And now look at our money supply. It's gone up to $1,900, right? Now, let's say that extra $900 that gets lent out, someone deposits that in the bank. We'll see as we go through this that initial $1,000 you put in, the bank multiplies it into being $2,700, and really this goes on and on until we approach zero, which would be infinite amount of deposits. So you put $1,000 in the bank, they keep 10%, but they loan out $900. Let's say they loan it out to your cousin. Your cousin puts $900 in the bank, they keep 10%, but then they loan out the remaining 90%. So from one deposit, banks can triple or quadruple the amount of money that's actually out in the economy. It's a big thing to keep in mind. Banks are the reason that we perpetuate the economy forward. We calculate this by doing the money multiplier. The money multiplier assumes that all money is kind of reinvested. This is an exaggeration, but for practical purposes in economics, we pretend that all of it works. Here's some of the symbols you'll want to know for the practice exercise. More to come on this. There is a formula for it. It does actually require calculus to do it, but I'll save you the details, and we'll basically say that the money multiplier simplifies to being the reciprocal of the reserve ratio. So the money multiplier is 1 over the reserve ratio. More to come on this. So we can calculate how much money is created by looking at the change in checkable deposits. This is the amount of excess reserves times the money multiplier. Again, don't get too lost in this. We'll practice with it here coming up. The big thing to just kind of follow up with this is to understand that the role of the bank is to take money, have it be deposited. They hold on to a small portion of it in case someone needs it, but then they lend the rest of it out. And that lending process is what perpetuates the global economies. So let's double over here. I had told you you're going to have a choice in assignments for this one. You can either do the math-based one, which is called the money multiplier, a bit more technical, but it's your only chance of getting full credit. And if you are just totally mailing it in and not doing math right now, you can do the reading and responding one and get 90% credit, assuming you do it all correctly. So let's take a peek at the money multiplier. Here it is. Using our basic information right here, I completed the graph for you, but I want you to go through the process of calculating the money multiplier. So we say, suppose that a bank has $1,000 in excess reserves, and the ratio is 40%. So let's suppose they have $1,000 as the initial deposit, right? The total increase would be the actual $1,000 you just put in, so that's easy. Now, the reserve ratio is 40%, so that means that the bank can lend back out 60% of it, right? If they have to keep 40 in reserves, they can lend out 60% of it. So 60% of 1,000 will be $600. That's how much it increases in one round. Now we see a total market increase of 1,600. Now, of course, you will continue on through this. So in this one here, you will take what is 60% of this can get loaned back out, and you'll continue so on and so forth. You'll see that your number will slowly approach this right here. I want you to use that to answer these questions right here. Now, on the second page of it, we do a little work with the money multiplier. We talk about how do things change in terms of the banking's role. So for all of these questions right here in subsection 4, what I want you to remember is that the formula for this is the money multiplier equals 1 over the reserve ratio. Hopefully doing that will help you to be able to do this right here. For number 5, you're going to use M to calculate the change in checkable deposits. That change in checkable deposits equals excess reserves times the money multiplier, or times M as I have it here. So I want you to use that formula for these two. And then for number 6 right here, the change in checkable deposits equals the change in the excess reserves divided by the reserve ratio. Using these, hopefully you'll be able to use some practical economic tools to kind of learn about how banks take a small deposit and amplify it into a great loanable amount. Now, of course, this leads down a whole different wormhole about the ethics of all of this and kind of why money isn't real at all, because frankly it's not. And we say that a bank created $10,000 out of thin air from a $1,000 deposit. It's a little bit sketchy, it's a little bit difficult to kind of fathom, but it's the reality we live in, that money isn't real and a small percentage of it is actually on hand at any given moment, but that's neither here nor there. If you find that the math one is not to your fancy or not to your liking, no worries. You can always punt and go with the bank runs in history. This has a reading with just a few questions about 2 of the bigger bank runs that took place in global history. Just give that a read over, respond to the questions. If you do a totally awesome job and get it all right, I'll give you 90% credit. But of course, if you're looking for maximum credit, I would say go with the money multiplier, try it out. It's just using formulas. It's just trying to analyze questions, talking about how banks perpetuate money. If you have any questions, any concerns, you know how to reach me, email, remind, write on Google Classroom. I'm happy to help you out. This is kind of high-end stuff, so I tried to give you an option to take the easy route if you wanted to. Other than that, hope you're doing all right. Reach out with questions. Hope you enjoy.